Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to official Saadia Afzaal YouTube channel. In our previous videos, we have discussed how this new administration under Trump has come forward with a lot of new policies vis-a-vis China, Russia, and especially its European allies. We also did a few videos on its new trade and tariff policy, which is affecting a lot of countries and India in particular. Today, we are going to discuss all this with our one guest who's a renowned expert on South Asia, has written for the New York Times, Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, and other publications. Currently, he's writing for Foreign Policy's weekly South Asia brief. Let me introduce you to our guest today, Michael Kugelman, who is the director of the South Asia Institute at Wilson Center, Washington. Michael, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Michael, before we get into our discussion or your expert opinion on South Asia, we have seen a lot of other policy shifts in the US, especially regarding European allies. Trump has criticized EU. Trump has repeatedly criticized NATO allies, especially for US defense dollars. The way Trump is isolating European allies, how do you think that is going to be for Trump in the long run?
Well, I mean, you've hit on a critical component of Trump's foreign policy priorities. I mean, he is someone who is very unconventional in terms of how he looks at traditional U.S. allies and rivals. And this is why I think, at least at this point in time, America's competitors and rivals, I think, are in a better position with him than America's best friends are. And we've indeed seen that the war in Ukraine, I think, has become the big flashpoint between the U.S. and its NATO partners. This is very clear. You know, I think that to answer your question, the answer is not, it may not necessarily hurt U.S. foreign policy given how the Trump administration wants to approach it. And that is because I think one of Trump's priorities is for the U.S. to play less of a role in the world. So, you know, one would argue that it's not a good thing if the U.S. faces significant tensions with its treaty allies in Europe and in Asia. But, you know, given that, you know, Trump, while he is not an isolationist by any means, he is someone that I think just does not envision the U.S. playing a very prominent or dominant diplomatic role on the global stage. And in that sense, I think that for him, the prospect of relations with traditional allies and partners going down, that's not necessarily the worst thing. But at the end of the day, I think things will even out. I think that his administration will recognize that it is critical to maintain at least a workable relationship with critical treaty allies in Europe and Asia, particularly given what is, I think, one of his preeminent goals, and that is to pursue the competition with China. I mean, he's going to need allies and partners to work with him on that goal.
Michael, the way Trump is aligning with Russia and China, or should I say realigning with these two countries, that he doesn't see these countries as enemies or a threat to the US, that world order which was established after the Second World War is breaking down. So what does Trump's alignment with China and Russia mean for global order?
Yeah, so, you know, just a quick word on China. I don't necessarily think that he's looking to realign with China. I think that he definitely does not want the U.S. to get dragged into a war or a conflict with China. And that, I think, will entail him wanting to try to ease tensions with China. But I do think that the economic side of that competition is going to remain very intense. And we've seen that, you know, tariffs have become a big weapon that Trump has sought to use, of course, against many countries, not just China. But I think that will continue. So I wouldn't say that he's going to look to, you know, pursue some type of new partnership with China, though, you know, as we think about some of his recent comments about China, such as what he said after his call with President Xi some weeks ago, he said that I look forward to working with China to promote peace and stability in the world. What he's saying there is that he does not want the U.S. to go to war with China. The last thing that he wants is for the U.S. to get dragged into wars and conflicts. So that's what I think will change. If you want to talk about a realignment, maybe you could talk about trying to jockey, trying for the U.S. to jockey into a position where it could have a less tense relationship with China, but the economic competition will continue. Now with Russia, Yeah, exactly. With Russia, very briefly, this remains to be seen. I mean, one thing that's very clear about President Trump is that he has always sought to take a very unconventional position when it comes to key U.S. rivals, including Russia. But at the same time, I think, he doesn't want countries like India, for example, to be buying Russian oil. He doesn't want U.S. partners and allies and so on buying from Russia. He wants them to buy from America. So he's not, I would argue that while like with China, while he might want to have a less tense relationship with Russia, he's not necessarily looking to take every possible step that would bring the U.S. into a full alignment with Russia.
Right. Very well explained. I was looking at your last four articles that you wrote. So one is victory in Delhi gives BJP a boost, uncertainty reigns in Bangladesh, India knows what makes Trump tick, and how will Trump's South Asia policy take shape? Obviously, your writings remained focused on South Asia, covering India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. So let's start with India, the recent meeting of President Trump and PM Modi. 2 points dominated this discussion, obviously, tariff issue, and the other one is illegal Indian immigrants issue. What are the major takeaways from Modi-Trump meeting?
Yeah, it's interesting, Saudi, that we've already been talking about how U.S. relations with its closest allies and partners could face some major challenges under Trump. India is, I think, an exception, right? India is not a formal treaty ally, or it's not an ally at all of the U.S., but it's a strategic partner. That's how it's defined. That's how the relationship is defined by both sides, including the new Trump administration. But I would argue that prospects for this relationship are quite strong. And I think we saw with the Modi visit that the new administration is very keen to partner with India. I would argue that one could have expected not much to have come out of that meeting when he came here, when he came to Washington, just because the administration was less than a month into having taken office, and many key India-focused posts in the U.S. government had been unfilled, and yet you have this joint statement after the meeting that laid out in very detailed fashion all kinds of areas and commitments for partnership, including a commitment to work toward the first phase of a new trade deal between the U.S. and India. So I think that things are looking quite good. I would argue that India is advantaged here because if you look at the people in charge in India, not just Modi, but his cabinet, it's basically the same cabinet that he had during his second term. And that second Modi term cabinet overlapped with several years of the first Trump administration. So they know Trump well, and I think that helps them sort of react and sometimes act proactively to try to avoid possible problems like getting slapped with tariffs. The tariff issue, I think, as you note, will be a key factor in the U.S.-India relationship. To this point, India has avoided tariffs that will likely be hit by the reciprocal tariff policy, which is something that's going to hit pretty much every country that does business with the United States. There are issues that are delicate, like illegal immigration, as you suggest. By some estimates, undocumented Indians are the third largest group in the U.S. India realistically is not going to be in a position to take them all back, though that's what the Trump administration wants. So the two sides will have to have some very difficult conversations and negotiations about some of these things. But the broader picture, I think, when it comes to the U.S.-India relationship, it's a very positive one. And a number of issues that had been tension points in the U.S.-India relationship when Joe Biden was president, issues like the Russia factor, issues like the Biden administration bringing attention to rights and democracy concerns in India. It's not going to be an issue. So I think that this relationship will be an exception to this broader trend of the U.S. facing tensions with some of its closest partners.
Right, you just mentioned, Michael, reciprocal tariffs. So President Trump obviously vows to impose those tariffs on India, as he has been calling India the tariff king also, with the highest tariffs on the US products. So Trump says he wants to be fair. In an interview earlier this year where he appeared on Fox News with Elon Musk, he said that he has told PM Modi that India should not be spared from Washington's tariffs. So you think India will be punished the same way on tariffs as the EU? Because just 2 days back, Trump is on EU.
Yeah, I mean, this is a critical. So India, quite frankly, cannot afford to face the prospect of a raft of tariffs from the U.S. And that's because, for all we talk about India's economic strength, and it is a strong economy, there's been signs of an economic slowdown in India. And if you look at some of the figures that the Indian government released recently, specifically the third quarter of last year, GDP was much lower than had been projected. So, and it's facing inflation and unemployment issues. So it can't afford to have a shock to its economy like this. I think India is doing everything possible to avoid getting hit hard by tariffs. So one thing that was very significant is that very soon after Trump took office, you had Indian officials very publicly signaling their willingness to bring down tariffs. And they have, in fact, brought down some tariffs, including those that relate to Trump's biggest pet peeves, like the issue of Harley Davidsons, which was a big issue for him during his first term. Those have been brought down. India has also...
Especially after Trump referred to India as the tariff king, with the highest tariffs on U.S. products.
Exactly. Yeah, he's used that term several times. So India, I think, has done the right things. It's pledged to buy more American products, including American energy, which is very important for Trump. And of course, it's agreed to take back undocumented workers in the U.S. So this all helps its cause. And I think it understands that Trump wants to use some of these issues, tariffs, as pressure points to get countries to do other things he wants them to do. And India, I think, has read this very well. But that said, India, indeed, I mean, the trade deficit with the U.S. is, it's not in the U.S.'s favor. So that's I think, a concern for Trump. And also, India does not necessarily have the highest tariffs of any close U.S. partner, but some of them are quite high, as Trump would define them. So this all suggests that even though India so far has done everything right to avoid the risk of tariffs, I think that it still does face considerable risks, particularly, and I think this is a critical point, there are some industries in India that are heavily protected for political reasons. If you look at agricultural products, for example, farmers, as in so many countries, are a very important political constituency. So I think that in some areas, the Indian government will be hesitant to bring down tariffs in order to help Indian farmers, a key political constituency. And of course, the Trump administration would not have sympathy for that. So that suggests to me that some sector in India could get hit. We don't know which one yet, but it's going to be difficult. This is why this trade deal that the two countries are going to talk about.
This is interesting, because this is your subject, so I would like you to shed some more light on this, because I was just looking at these details shared by some Indian economic think tanks, like this one, Financial Express report, which indicates that India faces losses up to $7 billion a year over Trump's tariff threat. And another report by Moody's suggests that India's growth will slow down in the coming years, which clearly shows that Trump 2.0 is not going all right for India. So in your opinion, which sectors in India are likely at risk?
Yeah, so I hinted that agriculture could face risks, just because it's a big... It's so important for the Indian government to have protectionist policies there. That's the one that I look at. There could, I think that there could be others that could face tariffs, whether you're talking about automobiles, though again, the Indian government has started taking down tariffs in some broader aspects of transport, like two-wheelers, motorcycles, Harley Davidsons. But for me, I think it's the agricultural sector that looms large. And, India, for all we talk about how it's become such a multifaceted economy focused on services and all, agriculture continues to be a big part of the Indian economy. It's a key source of employment and so on. So that would be pretty significant in a bad way for India's growth prospects.
Yeah. Pharmaceutical industry as well. I was just reading a few articles on that. Michael, by the way, which reminded me of one perception or opinion which is getting stronger or popular day by day in the US. That is Elon Musk being the de facto president. So do you also believe that Elon Musk is actually running the whole show?
Well, he certainly has a lot of power. That's very clear. And I think that the question moving forward is how that might impact his relationship with Trump. There's been a lot of speculation as to the relationship between the two men. That remains to be seen. It does seem to me that, at least so far, Musk's power has really revolved around domestic policy in the U.S. He hasn't really been involved in foreign policy, though I would argue that Trump's main priority during his first month or so in power has been on domestic affairs. Most of the executive orders he's issued have focused on domestic issues. But yeah, he is. It's a very unorthodox, very unconventional arrangement for sure when you talk about Musk and the clout that he enjoys.
So Trump's maximum pressure policy on Iran is also affecting, India's interests in a way, because recently we have seen Washington imposed economic sanctions on 4 companies over their involvement in Iranian oil trade. So moreover, if we look at Chabahar port project, which is obviously India's dream project, that is also under direct scrutiny of Washington. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I'm glad you hit on Iran. I mean, Iran, I think, is the exception to this trend of of Trump taking very unconventional positions on traditional rivals and competitors. He has not wanted. He has taken a very hostile position to Iran consistently going back to his first term. And indeed, you're right. His maximum pressure campaign, I think, does have very real implications, concerning implications for India. As you know, India takes very seriously its desire to work with Iran to develop this port project in Chabahar as part of its broader effort to expand trade and connectivity links with Central Asia, which it cannot do through a direct land route because it can't go through Pakistan. So instead, it's trying to work through Iran and then into Afghanistan and then into Central Asia. Now, I think in the Biden administration, the Indians had received some relief, or not relief, but they had received essentially, they had essentially knew that they could still work with Iran and not face the risk of sanctions. But I think with Trump's maximum pressure campaign, I don't think any country, including a country like India, is going to receive any type of sanctions waiver. So by continuing to work with Iran on the Chabahar project, it could pose major risks for India, and yet it's a very important project for India. I mean, it's reduced so much of its oil import and energy imports from Iran. That's not an issue anymore, but it's more the issue of Iran's essential place in India's plans to expand its trade and connectivity links, further afield into places like Central Asia.
Right. The way US is aligning with its EU allies or with China or Russia, what we were discussing earlier, we see a similar arrangement or alignments or realignments in this region, South Asia, where we see that India is trying to build close relations with Afghan Talibans, and Pakistan in the recent months, we have seen close relations with Bangladesh. So who do you think is likely to benefit from this alignment?
Well, I mean, I think that everyone can benefit in some ways. I mean, starting with India. I mean, the main reason why it has been working to slowly strengthen its ties with the Taliban, which indeed it seems so bizarre given how things had been pre-2021. Is that it wants to be able to better pursue its interests with Afghanistan, which include ensuring that there are no terrorism risks that it faces in Afghanistan. It's concluded it's easier to do that by having a better relationship with the Taliban. But also the connectivity issue that I just mentioned comes into play here. As I said, India wants to access Central Asia, and it really could realistically do that only through Iran and Afghanistan. So it needs to have those good relations with the Taliban to do that. Now, with Pakistan and Bangladesh, to be very candid, Pakistan does not have many good friends in South Asia, in its own neighborhood. Sri Lanka is one of the only exceptions if we look at the history going back to Sri Lanka's war. And of course, Bangladesh had essentially been off limits during the Hasina years. But this is a huge development for Pakistan, that not only is its ties with Bangladesh showing signs of becoming more friendly, but it has already begun trading with Bangladesh. Yeah. I think this is a huge victory, or not a victory. It's a huge benefit. It's a huge advantage for Pakistan's foreign policy and for its economy. It wants to expand its relations with South and Central Asia in order to pursue this broader policy of geoeconomic focused foreign policy. It's been a struggle, but if you're starting to trade with Bangladesh, you're getting off to a good start. I mean, Pakistan wants to focus more on Central Asia for its commercial engagements, but this is the first time that Pakistan and Bangladesh are trading formally since Bangladesh's independence. That's huge, and I think that could only benefit Pakistan so long as there are no challenges to this. In reality, I'm not sure what the key meat products will be. I'm not sure how much Bangladesh can strengthen Pakistan's economy. I'm not sure what Bangladesh has to offer, so to speak, but something is better than nothing, given just how much of urgency there is for Pakistan to scale up its commercial ties with its neighbors.
As you said, off to a good start, so let's see. But coming to close relations between Afghan Taliban and India, how is that going to impact Pakistan? Because we have had troubles with both our neighbors.
Right. I mean, no matter how you slice it, it's not a good thing for Pakistan. I mean, as you've alluded, Pakistan is having a lot of troubles with the Afghan Taliban since they came back to power, and I think that it's even more difficult for it to try to ease those tensions in a way that it could better pursue its interests, such as getting the Taliban to help Pakistan with the TTP problem, so long as the Afghan Taliban is moving closer to India. And the Afghan Taliban, I mean, they really want better relations with India. They're not just doing it for PR reasons. They really think India can be helpful. They know that India has traditionally been a major donor in Afghanistan. It's provided a lot of assistance and continues to do that. So, I think the last thing Pakistan can afford right now is to have India scaling up ties with the Afghan Taliban at a moment when Pakistan's relations with the Afghan Taliban are probably worse than they've ever been. And I think if you look at this from a geopolitical perspective, one could argue there's always been a competition between India and Pakistan in Afghanistan. And I think India now is at an advantage because, of course, it's working. It has these closer relations with the Taliban. Its embassy is partially open there. It's doing things that I think Pakistan might not have expected it to do after the Taliban returned to power. I mean, Pakistan is, of course, engaging with the Taliban. It has these long-standing ties, but it's just a very tense relationship. And when it comes to India, it doesn't have any issues with the Taliban right now, which is just, again, so odd.
That's very interesting because a lot of people feel, or they're of the view that this might be that India can be isolated in the neighborhood, because if we look at the region, China and Pakistan already enjoy good relations, which is a worry for India. And now Pakistan getting closer to Bangladesh, it might be adding fuel to the fire. So you don't see that isolation for India?
No, I mean, it's a complex issue, of course. If you look at the geopolitics of South Asia, I would argue that India has been disadvantaged by the fact that, for example, you've had, 4 countries in the region, half the region that recently got new leaders that have been much more China-friendly than their predecessors, right? Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Maldives. Afghanistan, I think, in that sense, might be an exception. I mean, of course, the Taliban is very close with China. China is now, after some hesitation, moving in, looking to invest in Afghanistan. But India, I think, is in a good place in Afghanistan. The Taliban wants to work with it. I mean, of course, it wants India's assistance and the capital that it can bring to Afghanistan. But unlike some of these other countries, India doesn't face barriers in Afghanistan. So, no, I don't think India is going to be isolated. It does face significant challenges in its neighborhood, and I think Bangladesh is the #1 challenge for India right now. But in Afghanistan, it's put itself in a better place. I mean, I think many might have assumed that India would lose Afghanistan, so to speak, with the Taliban back in power. That would help Pakistan's interest, would make it more difficult for India, but it's actually been a different result for New Delhi.
Right. Michael, let's come to the security situation in the region. With the change of command in the White House, India obviously expects more favorable actions from Washington, which can improve its security situation or which can support Delhi's security policy vis-a-vis Pakistan. But Trump administration, as I was looking at it, has approved $397 million military aid for Pakistan to keep its F-16 fighter jets fleet operational, whereas same Trump in his previous tenure restricted Pakistan's military aid. So there is a difference here. Do you think we are going to see a significant change in this policy of Washington regarding Pakistan?
Well, I mean, we, as you know, U.S. aid has essentially been suspended. It might be dismantled. The U.S. has suspended all foreign aid to the world, and of course, that's really significant for the relationship with Pakistan, just because Pakistan had been one of the biggest recipients of U.S. assistance in Asia, quite frankly. So that's, I think, a problem for the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. And then when you look at security assistance specifically, indeed, I mean, the Trump administration administration froze most security assistance to Pakistan. I don't see the Trump administration wanting to make a change to that. Now, if you talk about the issue of prospects for a new counterterrorism partnership between the U.S. and Pakistan, I know this is something that many in the Pakistani government would like to see. I don't know. I'm not sure that the first challenge here is that, and this is not new for the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, there are different priorities here. There are different concerns. They're sort of operating at cross purposes. Of course, Pakistan's main concern is TTP. The U.S.'s main concern is Islamic State Khorasan. Certainly Pakistan considers ISKP a challenge as well, but the TTP is the bigger one. I can't imagine the Trump administration being willing to commit dollars assistance to Pakistan unless the U.S. gets something out of it, right? I mean, this is Trump, Mr. Transactional. So maybe, there could be, and this would assume that the U.S. would actually want to reach out to Pakistan or would want to engage with Pakistan anytime soon. I'm not sure it would. This would assume that, we could look at the possibility of the U.S. saying, well, look, maybe we could help you, but how can you help us? And I think in that regard, the U.S. might look to hope that Pakistan could share intelligence or other information about Islamic State Khorasan and all. But I'm not sure if the trust level is high enough to afford that. There was a counterterrorism dialogue during the Biden administration, which met a few times. It didn't really result in much. Again, just about all U.S. security aid to Pakistan is frozen. So in terms of operational support, there's not much that one could expect. I don't think that the Trump administration would be interested in, non-operational support, like support for capacity building to help Pakistan better conduct investigations of terrorism. That would get into, maybe U.S. aid matters that, wouldn't be an issue. So bottom line is it will be a challenge, I think, that I'm not sure that the Trump administration would be particularly keen to look in this direction of a counterterrorism partnership with Pakistan unless Pakistan makes very clear that it would bring something to the U.S. Here.
So number one, trust deficit is there. And if it's not transactional, Trump won't want it, right? So it's as simple as that. Now, Trump offered Washington's best fifth-generation fighter jet F-35 Lightning II to India. How does this serve Delhi's security needs? Because when we witness the feedback from within India, a lot of their defense and security analysts are writing about it as well, and they're calling it a white elephant for Indian defense system.
Yeah, this is actually could interestingly become a point of tension between the U.S. and India. Indeed, I mean, Trump wants India to buy this platform just because it's so high value. I mean, it'll be a good deal financially for the U.S. But the fact that it's so expensive, I think it could make things difficult for India in terms of being willing to follow through on the deal. It wants to do business with the U.S. on the defense side, and of course, it's done a tremendous amount of business with the U.S. on the defense side over the last decade plus. But India is always thinking about its bottom line as well, and we've seen this in terms of its decisions on its energy trade. I mean, it's always said that it imports a lot of Russian oil because it's cheap, and if the U.S. had something to offer at a similar price point, it would be ready to do that. That's going to be something the two talk about, and it's the same with weaponry. So I think that the actual operational advantages of this platform would be very clear for India. It could certainly benefit from it, but I think the price is something that could become a major concern and constraint for India. And as we know, India has no shortage of defense partners at the end of the day, right? It works with the U.S. increasingly, but it still looks to Russia, it looks to France, it looks to Israel. Those are its main arms sellers. So I think that it does have a bit of leverage, but it doesn't want to get into an ugly situation with the U.S. where the U.S. feels that India is not moving forward and being willing to purchase this big thing. But it's interesting that, unless I'm wrong, the joint statement that came out after the Modi-Trump meeting did not mention this. Trump himself mentioned it in a comment he made, I think, during one of the press conferences when Modi was there, but it wasn't in the joint statement, which suggests that they realize that it may be some time before they can be in a position to talk very substantively about completing this deal.
A lot of bridges to cross. Michael, I'm sorry for taking up so much of your time, but one last question, I promise. India is also a recipient of Russian defense system S-400, which is considered the opposite of this F-35. In the past, we saw when Turkey procured the Russian defense system, Washington just, pushed Ankara out of its F-35 program. So how will it work for India, which is obviously already getting this S-400 and now F-35 being in the pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the S-400 is going to be a problem for India in the sense that the U.S. is not going to make a fuss of it. And this gets to what I said before, that the Russia factor is not going to be a tension point for the U.S.-India relationship. Just like, a lot of people don't realize this, it's very interesting that the BrahMos missiles that India has been sent to the Philippines and that it wants to send to Indonesia and several other countries in Southeast Asia, BrahMos missiles are a product of a consortium between Russia and India. You're not going to have any concerns and complaints from the Trump administration on that. But yeah, so I think that, from the Trump administration's perspective, it's okay with the S-400 deal. It would really prefer that, India move forward on that other deal that we're discussing as well. But I think I would leave you with this. I do think that as much as the Trump administration will be less uncomfortable about all this Russian equipment going into India than the Biden administration was, there is still going to be that national security concern. The reality is that you have a lot of very sensitive, modern American military technology and equipment going into an Indian defense sector that continues to be chock full of Russian equipment. And I think that, given, Trump's very strong focus on national security, he will be concerned about that dynamic. And I think that could be something that comes up in subsequent discussions between the U.S. and India.
Is not as uncomfortable with Russia as it used to be.
Correct. Not as uncomfortable, but still concerned about several issues.
Right. Michael Kugelman, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Great discussion.